40,000 people stood on the docks in Genoa and watched the ships leave. 4 vessels, 45 tons of aid, medicines, food, baby formula. Volunteers from Italian civil society organisations, unions, political parties, NGOs. Italy's flag on the hull. The global Sumud Flotilla set sail on April 27th, the largest civilian humanitarian convoy in history. 58 vessels, 500 participants from 44 countries. 4 of those vessels were Italian. The aid was Italian. The people on board were Italian. 5 days later, Israeli military speedboats surrounded them in international waters near Crete, 500 miles from Gaza. Lasers pointed at the crew, semi-automatic weapons drawn. Communications jammed. Israeli forces played music over the radio channels to cut off coordination. 22 of the 58 vessels were boarded and seized. Around 175 activists detained and transported to Israel. And in Rome, Giorgia Meloni called an emergency meeting. This is the story of what happened in the Mediterranean last week, and the question it has placed at the centre of Italian politics, a question that connects Gaza, Sigonella, and the limits of Meloni's foreign policy all at once. The flotilla had been months in preparation. Italian organisations, the trade union CGIL, the ANPI Partisan Association, civil society groups across the country, had registered over 15,000 participants. The Genoa departure drew a crowd of 40,000. A union official said that if anything happened to the ships, European dock workers would block all civilian shipments to Israel. These were not fringe organisations. These were mainstream Italian civil society. And they were watching. What happened near Crete was described by flotilla organisers as a direct and illegal attack on civilian and unarmed boats in international waters. Israel had no jurisdiction hundreds of miles from its shores. The boats were not approaching Gaza. They were in the open Mediterranean, near Greek territorial waters. One boat was left sinking. Activists reported being dragged face down across the floor, beaten until they lost consciousness. Amnesty International documented sleep deprivation, denial of water and medical care. 2 activists, one Spanish, one Brazilian, were held in an Israeli prison without charges. They began a hunger strike. The Italian government's response came quickly. Meloni convened an emergency meeting with Foreign Minister Tajani, Defence Minister Crosetto, and Intelligence Chief Mantovano. The government condemned the seizure, called it illegal, demanded the immediate release of all Italians on board. And then Meloni said one more thing, one word that changed the entire tone of Italy's response. She called the flotilla useless. Not the interception, the flotilla itself, the ships, the 45 tons of aid, the 40,000 people who stood on the docks in Genoa to watch them leave. Useless. She said the mission served no practical purpose, that humanitarian aid reaches Gaza through official channels, that the flotilla was a political gesture, not a humanitarian one. The opposition erupted. They had people on those ships, elected senators, MEPs, deputies, people who had been detained, beaten, put on hunger strike. And the Prime Minister of Italy had just called their mission useless. That word is now doing 2 things simultaneously. It distances Meloni from the flotilla politically. She cannot be accused of endorsing what Israel calls a provocation. But it also places her in an impossible position with the 40,000 Italians who watched those ships leave Genoa, with the 2 million who marched for Gaza last October, with the 89% of Italians who do not consider Israel an ally. She condemned the interception, she called it illegal, and she called the mission useless. Both things at the same time in the same week. That is not a foreign policy position. That is a contradiction, and it will follow her. If you're finding this useful, subscribe to The Record Room, because this is where the story becomes impossible for Meloni to manage cleanly. Because of Sigonella. In September 2025, while the flotilla was preparing its voyage, an Italian Green Party deputy filed a formal question in Parliament. He had evidence that an Israeli military aircraft, a KC-130H Hercules, had made a round trip from an Israeli airbase to Naval Air Station Sigonella in Sicily. The question was direct. Was this aircraft spying on the flotilla? Was it loading military equipment to be used against the ships? The Italian army's response was careful. It called the landing a technical stop for logistical support from the US Army, in full compliance with national laws and international agreements. That answer did not satisfy the question. It did not explain why an Israeli military aircraft needed Sigonella at precisely the moment the flotilla was preparing to sail. Now hold that detail alongside everything else Meloni has navigated in recent months. She refused Sigonella for US military flights targeting Iran. Trump called Italy no help at all. Rubio flew to Rome to repair the damage. And all of that while Israeli military aircraft were apparently using the same base, the same runway, the same logistics chain, for operations that may have been directed against Italian citizens at sea. The Italian government has not confirmed what the Israeli aircraft was doing at Sigonella. It has not opened a formal investigation. It has not connected the dots publicly. But the dots exist, and Italian journalists, parliamentarians, and civil society organisations are connecting them. Consider what this means for Meloni's position. She condemned the flotilla interception. She called it illegal. She demanded the release of Italian citizens. These were the right words and the right moves. But she is also the Prime Minister who has presided over a base that Israeli military aircraft have used, by the Italian government's own admission, for logistical operations at the moment the flotilla was at sea. She is the Prime Minister who refused that same base for US operations against Iran on procedural grounds, while apparently not applying the same procedural scrutiny to Israeli military use. That inconsistency is not yet at the centre of Italian public debate, but it is there, and the opposition knows it. The Five Star Movement, the Greens, the Democratic Party, all had politicians on board the flotilla. Marco Croatti, a five-star senator, Benedetta Scuderi, a Greens MEP, Arturo Scotto and Annalisa Corrado from the Democrats. These were not random activists. These were elected Italian representatives, detained by a foreign military in international waters, while Italian law enforcement opened an investigation into possible torture. The Rome prosecutor's office has already opened an investigation into the detention of activists from the October 2025 flotilla interception, the previous attempt, which also involved Italian participants. Allegations include sleep deprivation and physical abuse. Now there is a second interception, more Italian citizens detained, more allegations. And at the centre of it all, a naval base in Sicily, whose role in these events the Italian government has not fully explained. Italy sent 45 tons of aid to Gaza. Israel stopped the ships 500 miles away. Italian citizens were seized at gunpoint in international waters. Meloni condemned it. She demanded answers. She held the emergency meeting. But the question that follows her, about what Sigonella was used for, and by whom, and when, does not disappear because an emergency meeting was held. It waits. Now consider the broader picture that this episode reveals. Italy has the largest UNIFIL contingent in Lebanon, nearly 1,000 soldiers. Israeli forces fired warning shots at an Italian convoy in April. Meloni called it completely unacceptable. She summoned the Israeli ambassador. Then Israeli forces seized Italian ships in international waters. Meloni called it illegal. She demanded the release of Italian citizens. 2 incidents, 2 condemnations, 2 summoned ambassadors, and Israel continues. The pattern is visible, and it is producing a shift in Italian public opinion that Meloni cannot afford to ignore heading into the 2027 election. A recent survey found that only 11% of Italians consider Israel an ally. 2 million Italians marched in solidarity with Gaza last October. 40,000 stood on the Genoa docks to watch the flotilla ships leave. These are not marginal numbers. They represent a mainstream Italian sentiment that has been building for months and is now, with the flotilla interception, reaching a new intensity. Meloni's coalition partners are watching carefully. Brothers of Italy, the Lega, Forza Italia, each reads the same polls. Each understands that the 2027 campaign will be shaped in part by how Meloni navigated this period. Did she stand up for Italian citizens? Did she hold firm against a foreign government that seized Italian ships in international waters? Did she ask the right questions about what happened at Sigonella? Or did she issue condemnations and hold meetings while the underlying questions remained unanswered? The opposition will not let those questions disappear. They were on the ships. Their names are in the passenger lists. Their colleagues were detained, beaten, and put on hunger strike. They have standing to demand answers, and they will use it. Italy sent 45 tons of aid to Gaza. Israel stopped the ships 500 miles away. Italian citizens were seized at gunpoint in international waters. Meloni condemned the interception, called the mission useless, and still couldn't answer the question about Sigonella. That question does not disappear because an emergency meeting was held. It waits. Subscribe to the Record Room, because the next file is already open.